I am a master surgeon who transmigrated into an operating room from an early era tragic novel. Lying on the operating table was the female lead, while outside the door, the domineering male lead commanded, "Take her kidney to save Mia." The barrage exploded with comments. The tragedy begins. The female lead loses a kidney, and the male lead will regret it. The doctor is the male lead's best friend. He'll definitely do it. I looked at the scalpel in my hand and adjusted my gold-rimmed glasses. I'm a doctor, not a butcher, and certainly not ignorant of the law. I immediately took off my sterile gown, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. "Hello, 911, there's illegal human organ trafficking happening here. The mastermind's surname is Vance." The moment I hung up the phone, the operating room fell so silent that the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor became deafening. The intern beside me, Leo Carter, stood with his mouth agape wide enough to fit an entire egg. "But Professor Hart, why did you call the police?" "What else?" I slipped my phone back into my pocket. "Did you expect me to actually perform a magic trick and make a kidney disappear?" Leo stammered, but that's President Vance, the biggest investor in our hospital. Does being an investor place him above the law? I raised an eyebrow. Did he happen to acquire the criminal code along with his investment? Leo was left speechless by my retort. At that moment, with a loud bang, the heavy door of the operating room was kicked open from outside. Julian Vance burst in, bringing a gust of icy air with him, his eyes bloodshot as he grabbed me by the collar. "Elias Hart, why are you still dawdling here? Mia is dying. I order you now, immediately operate on Chloe." His roar left my ears ringing, his spit nearly splattering onto my glasses. Disgusted, I frowned and tried to push him away. "Director Vance, please calm down. This is a sterile operating room. Your barging in here is a serious violation of hospital regulations." "Regulations?" He laughed as if hearing the biggest joke. "I am the regulation. If I tell you to save someone, you save them. Have you forgotten that I'm the one who saved your life? Now I'm asking you to operate and you dare talk to me about regulations?" Oh, right. There was this part in the original story. The original protagonist was an orphan who fell into water as a child and was saved by Julian Vance's best friend. Later, when that friend died, Julian took this debt of gratitude upon himself, believing the protagonist owed them a life. Unfortunately, the one standing here is me, a tacky doctor who believes in saving a life, charging only consultation fees. I leisurely straightened the crumpled white coat that he had grabbed. "Firstly, President Vance, Daniel Lee was the one who saved me back then, not you. What you're doing is called emotional transference, which in psychology is considered an unhealthy defense mechanism. Secondly, even if I owed him a life, there's no reason to sacrifice another innocent person's kidney. And lastly," I paused, then tilted my chin towards someone behind him. "You are now suspected of inciting intentional injury. If you have anything to say, save it for the officers." Julian Vance's furious roar abruptly ceased. He turned stiffly and saw several uniformed police officers filing in. The lead officer wore a stern expression, holding a small notebook in hand. "Which one of you is Mr. Julian Vance?" Julian's face flushed crimson instantly, then turned ashen gray before finally bleaching white. The entire internet's barrage comments exploded instantly. "What's going on? That's not how the script was written. This doctor doesn't play by the rules. He actually called the police. Haha, the domineering CEO is stunned. I've never seen such a refreshingly unconventional doctor." Julian was clearly dumbfounded too, staring at me incredulously before shifting his gaze to the officers. "Do you even know who I am? Who gave you permission to come in?" The police officer stepped forward, expressionless. "We received a report that someone here was attempting to perform an illegal organ transplant. Mr. Vance, everything you just said was clearly heard by our colleagues outside." Julian's Adam's apple bobbed as he forced himself to remain calm. This is a misunderstanding. I was just overly worried about my girlfriend's health and spoke without thinking. Oh, spoke without thinking. I smiled, shaking my phone in my pocket. Unfortunately, I happened to be recording just now. President Vance, your words, "take her kidney," were enunciated clearly and delivered with such conviction. Hardly sounds like a slip of the tongue. Julian's face darkened completely. He stared at me with a gaze so intense it seemed he wanted to devour me alive. I met his glare fearlessly, even adjusting the angle of my glasses to ensure the lenses perfectly reflected his wretched plight. The lead police officer stepped forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. "Mr. Vance, we now suspect your involvement in a serious criminal case. Please come with us to assist in the investigation." The icy handcuffs clicked shut, restraining this once overbearing CEO. Julian's body trembled violently as he glared at me with gritted teeth, spitting out each word. "Elias Hart, just you wait." I nodded and replied with utmost sincerity. "Understood, President Vance, but I suggest you find yourself a good lawyer first. After all, the sentencing for instigation charges can be quite severe once convicted." As the police escorted him, his venomous glare nearly burned 2 holes through me as he passed. I smiled and waved at him cheerfully. "Safe travels, President Vance. The tea at the police station probably isn't as expensive as what you serve in your office. Do bear with it." It wasn't until Julian's figure completely disappeared at the end of the corridor that Leo Carter finally let out a long sigh of relief, looking at me with undisguised admiration. "Teacher Hart, you are so brave." I smoothed out the collar that Julian had crumpled and calmly replied, "That's not bravery. That's called abiding by the law. All right, why is everyone standing around? Get the patient on the operating table back to their room, notify the family, and prepare for the next surgery." I turned toward the sink to scrub in again. The barrage of comments was still scrolling wildly. "Damn, so satisfying. This doctor is my god. This is how normal people should react. Who says the domineering CEO can just demand someone's kidney? I can't wait to see the White Moonlight's reaction when she hears this news. Heh heh." White Moonlight. Oh yes, and there's Mia Reed lying in the VIP ward next door waiting for a kidney transplant. I washed my hands clean and gave my reflection in the mirror a kind smile. No rush, one at a time. As a doctor, making rounds is part of my job, especially for patients in critical condition. They deserve even more care and attention. When I pushed open the VIP ward door, Mia Reed was leaning against the headboard, shedding pitiful tears. Her manager and assistant hovered by the bedside, one handing her tissues, the other fanning her, attending to every one of her needs with meticulous care. "Mia, please don't cry. Getting angry over that kind of woman isn't worth it." "Exactly. President Vance will surely get justice for you. What kind of person is that Chloe anyway? How dare she compete with you?" Mia clutched her chest, looking as if she might faint at any moment. "No, it's not Chloe's fault. It's all mine. My weak constitution is to blame. If it weren't for me, Julian wouldn't be in such a difficult situation." As she spoke, her tears fell even heavier, evoking pity from all who saw her. What a magnificent white lotus in this flourishing age! I cleared my throat, interrupting this deeply moving sisterly affection. "Miss Reed, how are you feeling?" All three turned to look at me simultaneously. The moment Mia saw me, she instantly wiped away her tears and replaced them with an expression of terror and grievance. Dr. Hart." Her agent, Miss Bell, immediately stepped forward like a mother hen protecting her chicks, shielding the bed. "Dr. Hart, what are you doing here? Our Mia doesn't want to see you. You're the one who got President Vance taken away by the police." I waved the medical chart in my hand, smiling as gentle as a spring breeze. "Miss Bell, that's putting it too strongly. I'm just a law-abiding citizen. Besides, as Miss Reed's attending physician, making rounds and checking on my patient's condition is part of my duty." I turned toward the sink to scrub in again. The barrage of comments was still scrolling wildly. "Miss Reed, did you say you were in terrible pain? Is that correct?" Mia stiffened, looking up at me timidly before nodding. Yes, yes, doctor, I feel terrible, she said, clutching her waist for emphasis. Oh, I see. I nodded while jotting notes on the medical chart, speaking in a caring tone. Kidney failure is indeed painful, especially during acute episodes. But don't worry, our hospital has quite advanced medical technology. I looked up and gave her an encouraging smile. To better assess the lesion and determine your pain level, I'm ordering a series of tests for you. Please get ready, we'll begin immediately. Mia's agent, Miss Bell, immediately asked wearily, "What kind of tests? Mia is so physically weak right now, she can't handle any strain." "Don't worry, they're all routine examinations." I flipped the medical chart to show them. For example, a 24-hour Holter monitor to track your heart rate changes, an enhanced abdominal CT scan to check for any abnormalities in your kidney structure, plus bone density scans, nerve conduction tests. With each item I mentioned, Mia's face grew paler. The most crucial one, I shifted my tone, emphasizing the words, is the pain sensitivity test. Pain sensitivity test? Mia's voice trembled. Correct. I smiled even more amiably. This is a new auxiliary diagnostic method. By injecting microdoses of neural blockers subcutaneously around your kidney area, we can precisely locate the source of your pain. If the pain disappears after injection, it confirms the lesion is indeed there. If it does not disappear or the pain relocates, that would indicate other issues. I clapped my hands, and immediately a nurse wheeled in a cart laden with instruments and syringes. On the top tray lay neatly arranged rows of needles, varying in length and thickness, gleaming coldly under the lights. "Dr. Hart!" Miss Bell screamed. "What are you doing? Our Mia is a Golden Globe-winning actress. Her body is precious. How can you just casually give her injections?" "Miss Bell, this is treatment, not a beauty pageant." I picked up the longest needle and waved it in front of Mia's eyes. "Miss Reed, didn't you say you were in terrible pain? I'm trying to help you. Think about it. Just a few injections and we can identify the root cause. You might not even need a kidney transplant. Don't you want to recover quickly and return to the big screen?" My words were gentle and considerate, brimming with concern for the patient, but Mia was scared out of her wits, shrinking into the corner of the bed. "No, I don't want to. I don't want the shot. I suddenly feel much better." "That won't do." I refused sternly. "Fluctuating symptoms are dangerous. As your attending physician, I must take full responsibility for your health." Holding the syringe, I advanced toward her step by step. "Miss Reed, don't worry. My technique is excellent. I guarantee it'll be done in one go. It might hurt a little, but for your health's sake, just bear with it for a moment." Mia's pupils contracted sharply as she watched the needle tip in my hand draw closer to her waist. The fear in her eyes was no longer feigned, but a genuine tremor from within. "Stay away. Don't come any closer," she screamed, scrambling off the bed on all fours in a desperate attempt to flee. "Ah, Miss Reed, don't move around recklessly. You're still a patient," I cautioned her anxiously. Yet the instinct for survival clearly overpowered her frail persona. Mia scrambled frantically to hide in the corner, staring at me in terror as if I weren't a doctor, but some death-dealing demon. I halted my steps and sighed regretfully. "It seems Miss Reed's mental state requires more urgent treatment than her kidneys." I turned to the nurse beside me and said, "Make a note. Patient, emotionally agitated, refusing to cooperate with treatment, displaying persecutory delusions. Notify psychiatry department to arrange a consultation." Mia's agent, Miss Bell, was completely dumbfounded. "Psychiatry? Elias Hart, you've gone too far." I innocently spread my hands. "I'm just doing my duty as a doctor. After all, when a patient goes from kidney failure on death's door 1 second to dodging treatment with vigorous strides the next, it's hard not to examine her mental health with professional scrutiny." I slid the long needle back into the syringe tray with a crisp ding. Mia shuddered all over, her gaze at me brimming with despair. She knew her act had been seen through by me. I gave her what could be called a gentle smile. Miss Reed, don't be afraid. It's just a psychiatric evaluation. Standard procedure. We'll start with a questionnaire. Very simple. Director Louis Kane from the psychiatric department was my senior colleague, an elegant man who looked more like a business elite than I did. He received my consultation request and appeared in the VIP ward with his team in less than 10 minutes. Junior sister, I heard you've got a tricky case here. Director Kane adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, his eyes behind the lenses gleaming with wisdom, or perhaps gossip. I pointed at Mia, who was curled up in the corner, wrapping herself in blankets like a silkworm cocoon. Senior Brother Kane, take a look. This is the patient, Miss Reed, a renowned actress. She claims to be in the late stages of kidney failure, suffering unbearable pain and urgently needing a transplant. But when I prepared to perform a pain point blockade test on her, she suddenly sprinted around and exhibited severe persecutory delusions. Director Kane walked over, crouched down, and tried to communicate with Mia. Hello, Miss Reed. I'm Dr. Kane from the psychiatric department. Don't be nervous. We're just here to chat. Mia peeked half her head out from under the blanket, eyeing me wearily before casting a frightened glance at me, as if they're in this together. Director Kane turned back and gave me a "you really know how to play" look. I flashed him a standard procedure smile. Mia's agent, Miss Bell, finally snapped out of it and rushed forward to block Director Kane. What are you doing? Our Mia isn't sick. She doesn't need psychiatric evaluation. This is slander. I'll sue you. Director Kane stood up leisurely, straightening his suit jacket. Madam, first of all, whether someone is mentally ill isn't for you to decide, nor for me. It's determined by scientific evaluation. Secondly, we are currently just conducting a preliminary consultation following standard medical procedures. Thirdly, if you continue causing such a disturbance and disrupting hospital operations, I'll have no choice but to call security. He spoke at a measured pace, yet with an undeniable authority. Miss Bell was cowed into silence, opening her mouth but not daring to make another scene. I seized the moment to add, by the way, Miss Bell, as a public figure, if Miss Reed is proven to have faked illness to obtain organs or even instigated criminal acts, you know better than I do how the law would view that. At that point, a psychiatric consultation would be the least of her worries. This sentence was the straw that broke the camel's back. Miss Bell's face turned pale instantly. Mia trembled even more violently beneath the quilt. After what seemed like an eternity, muffled sobs emerged from under the quilt. Then Mia abruptly threw off the covers, knelt on the floor, and wept bitterly like pear blossoms bathed in rain. I was wrong. I admit I was wrong. Dr. Hart, I beg you, please let me go. Sobbing uncontrollably, she crawled toward me on hands and knees, trying to clutch my legs. I took a subtle step back, evading her grasp. I'm not sick. It was all an act. I never had kidney failure. It was Julian. It was Julian who made me do it. He said he loved me, that he couldn't live without me, that he'd take care of everything. Oh ho, so now we're playing the blame game. I took out my phone and turned the recording function again. Miss Reed, please continue. I'm listening. You're saying Julian Vance told you to fake kidney failure. Yes, it was him. Mia nodded frantically like she'd grabbed a lifeline. He said Chloe owed him, that taking one of her kidneys to save me was only right. He promised to handle everything and told me to just wait peacefully in the hospital. I was completely deceived by him. I'm a victim too, Dr. Hart. She was crying so hard she could barely catch her breath, her acting skills rivaling those from her award-winning film. Too bad I'm not a judge. Victim, I let out a light laugh. Miss Reed, you're an adult this year, aren't you? Capable of making your own decisions. Did Julian Vance hold a knife to your throat, forcing you to fake an illness? You've been basking in the perfection he seized for you by force, while lying here completely at ease waiting for a kidney from an innocent girl. Now that the truth is out, you're trying to wash your hands clean of everything. Do you really think the law will believe you?" Mia's sobs abruptly stopped. I crouched down to meet her eye level and spoke deliberately. "Ever heard of fraud? It's the act of illegally obtaining public or private property of significant value through fabricated facts or concealed truths. Though what you're after isn't property, but far more precious human organs, which only makes it more heinous. And what about being an
Accomplice to instigation? You knew Julian was going to commit a crime, yet not only did you fail to stop him, you actively facilitated conditions for his criminal acts. Tell me, how do you think the judge would rule?" Mia froze completely. Her mouth hung open, tears still clinging to her lashes, forgotten in their fall. Senior Kane beside her adjusted his glasses and added, "From a psychoanalytic perspective, Miss Reed, your behavior exhibits classic traits of histrionic personality disorder with antisocial tendencies. I recommend hospitalization for observation and treatment." "No, I won't be hospitalized. I'm not crazy." Mia finally broke down. She sprang up from the floor, pointing at me and shrieking, "Elias Hart, you poisonous woman! Why are you doing this to me? Julian will never let you get away with this." In her agitated state, she lost her balance and staggered backward 2 steps, accidentally bumping into the nearby medication cart holding trays of syringes. Crash! A whole tray of needles and medicine bottles crashed to the ground, the shattering of glass piercingly sharp and clear. Mia was startled by the noise, her feet slipping beneath her. Her arms flailed wildly in the air, while her legs instinctively began rapid, alternating steps. That posture, that rhythm, that desperate, struggling grace. Unnoticed until now, several curious fellow patients had gathered at the ward door to watch the commotion. One of the old men couldn't hold back and blurted out, "Hey, isn't this girl dancing the tango?" The entire corridor instantly fell into deathly silence. Mia froze mid-movement, all color draining from her face. Suppressing laughter, I cleared my throat and said to the nurse beside me, "Note, patient not only walks briskly, but can also perform advanced tango. Excellent physical condition. Recommend discharge." Then I turned to Senior Brother Kane. "Senior Brother, it seems I misdiagnosed her. She's perfectly sound mentally, just plain wicked." Senior Brother Kane nodded and began writing something solemnly in his notebook. "Noted, consultation concluded. Diagnosis, not a psychiatric condition, falls under moral and legal jurisdiction. Recommend transferring to relevant authorities." He closed his notebook, winked at me, and walked off stylishly with his team. Mia stood amidst the wreckage, listening to the hushed whispers and barely suppressed laughter from outside the door. Finally, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed stiffly backward. This time, she truly had fainted. I shook my head and said to the nurse, "Carry her back to bed and administer a sedative." "Yes, Dr. Hart." I turned and walked out of the hospital room, leaving behind the desperate cries of her agent, Miss Bell. One down, one more to go. I checked the time. Chloe Evans, the original female lead I'd saved, should be waking up soon. When Chloe awoke, she was still dazed. She stared at the snow-white ceiling, inhaling the scent of disinfectant as her memories gradually returned. She remembered going to donate blood for Mia. Her constitution had always been weak, and she'd fainted right after the blood draw. "You're awake." A nurse walked in and adjusted her IV drip rate. "Where are you?" Chloe's voice was faint. "You're in the hospital. You fainted from anemia, and Dr. Hart arranged for your admission." The nurse, being kind-hearted, couldn't help but add a few more words. "You're really lucky. Thankfully, our Dr. Hart was quick-witted, or you'd be dealing with more than just anemia right now." "Dr. Hart?" Chloe looked puzzled. The nurse recounted the events to her, embellishing the details a bit, from how Julian had gone mad trying to steal her kidney to how Elias Hart calmly called the police and then how he outsmarted the scheming Mia Reed. Chloe stood dumbfounded, utterly stunned. She couldn't believe that Julian, the man she'd loved for so many years, who repeatedly vowed to care for her forever, would actually try to remove her kidney for another woman. That wasn't some object, it was part of her very body. Overwhelming grief and belated terror washed over her as she covered her face and wept silently. When her emotions had calmed slightly, the first thing she did was pull the IV needle out of her hand and get out of bed to find her savior. I found her in the doctor's office. I was writing a detailed report on Mia's condition to submit to the police. Dr. Hart! Chloe rushed in, her eyes reddened, and the moment she saw me, she fell to her knees with a thud. Dr. Hart, thank you for saving me. I can never repay you. Her tear-streaked face tilted upward, eyes brimming with childlike adoration and dependence, radiating an air of complete devotion. The barrage of comments grew excited again. Ah, the female lead has fallen for the doctor. I love this plot twist. Go for it, doctor. Such a wonderful girl deserves you.
I withdrew my hand expressionlessly. Offer yourself in marriage? Don't even think about it. My humble temple isn't big enough to house your love-struck Buddha. I picked up a tablet from my desk, pulled up an interface, and handed it to her. No need for repayment, just settle this first. Chloe numbly took the tablet and looked down. On the screen was a lengthy electronic bill titled Detailed Hospitalization Expenses for Patient Chloe Evans. Special care fee, expert consultation fee, psychological counseling fee, nutritional meal fee. And I pointed to one particular item, explaining specifically for her. High-risk occupational environment surcharge. After all, handling your case means I've offended the richest person in this city. The mental stress is enormous. At the bottom of the bill was a number that made her pupils tremble. Chloe stared at that long string of zeros, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. This much? Is it too much? I leaned back in my chair, watching her leisurely. I think it's quite fair. After all, a healthy kidney costs much more than this price on the black market. I'm practically giving you a discount. Chloe's face instantly turned deathly pale. She clutched the tablet tightly, her lips trembling without uttering a single word. Seeing her world-crumbling expression, I felt nothing inside. I wiped my smile off my face, leaned slightly forward, and stared into her eyes. By the way, your physical examination report is out. I've done a very thorough checkup for you. I paused briefly, then continued in a matter-of-fact tone. All your physiological indicators are extremely healthy, especially your 2 kidneys, full of vitality, good for another 50 years at least. A faint look of bewildered relief appeared on Chloe's face. I changed the subject and continued. But I still booked you an appointment with a specialist. Chloe looked up confused. A specialist? But I'm perfectly healthy, aren't I? Physically, yes. I pointed at her head calmly, my tone carrying undeniable professionalism. But this needs a thorough examination. Chloe grew even more puzzled, instinctively touching her own head. My brain? Dr. Hart, what do you mean? Is there something wrong with my brain? I looked into her pure, innocent eyes filled with why, and bluntly delivered my diagnosis. A man wants to dig out your kidney for another woman, and your first reaction isn't to call the police, scream for help, or run away. Afterwards, what occurs to you isn't to sue him or make him pay, but to pledge yourself in marriage to whoever saves you. I paused, giving her time to digest this, then asked the question that struck at the very soul. Chloe, tell me, would a properly functioning brain react like this? My question sliced through Chloe's carefully constructed logic like a scalpel, laying bare the foundation she'd relied on for survival. She sat frozen as color drained from her face, her gaze shifting from confusion to shock before finally going completely blank. I. Her lips parted, but no words of defense emerged because she realized every word I said was true. Why not call the police? Why not consider suing him? Why keep thinking he was just deceived, or it was just a momentary lapse? I didn't rush her, just watched her quietly. Curing love addiction is like treating any other illness. The first step is always making the patient recognize they're sick. After a long silence, Chloe finally asked in a barely audible voice, "Then, what should I do?" It's simple. I laid out 2 clear paths for her. First, pay the bill. Second, take the evidence I've prepared for you to the lawyer I'm recommending. Sue Julian Vance until he's bankrupt and rotting in jail. I slid a business card across the table toward her. James Wee, gold medal lawyer, specializes in violent injury cases and financial disputes. Expensive rates, but with an undefeated record. You can pay his fees using your compensation money. Chloe stared at the minimalistic yet exquisitely crafted business card as if gazing at a gateway to a new world. Compensation money? Of course, I said matter-of-factly. Compensation for emotional distress, lost wages, nutritional expenses, and most importantly, punitive damages for attempted intentional harm. Julian Vance has so much money, it'd be a shame to demand more, considering how eager he was to carve out your kidney. Chloe's breathing grew rapid. She looked at me, and for the first time there was something in her eyes beyond anger and resentment. It was a spark, a flame called defiance. "All right," she said, picking up the business card and clutching it tightly in her palm. "I'll sue him." Watching her finally get it, I nodded in satisfaction. The child is teachable. As for the hospitalization fees, considering your diligence, we can do installments. You can pay me after you receive the compensation in the coming days. 2 completely different dramas unfolded in the hospital. Mia Reed, due to feigning illness and suspected conspiracy, was officially investigated by the police. Her agency terminated her contract immediately to distance themselves. The once celebrated actress became a rat scurrying across the street, hated by all, crying herself to sleep every day. Her mental state visibly deteriorated, almost aligning with my initial diagnosis of recommending psychiatric consultation. As for Julian Vance, although he was temporarily released on bail thanks to his family connections, his company's stock price plummeted. Partners withdrew their investments one after another, and he was overwhelmed with troubles. He sent people to approach me several times, sometimes threatening, sometimes tempting, trying to make me change my testimony. I refused to see them every time, only letting my lawyer handle the discussions. My lawyer happened to be James Wee as well. That's right, keep the benefits within the family. Meanwhile, under lawyer James Wee's guidance, Chloe Evans underwent a complete transformation. She stopped weeping and instead began actively studying legal knowledge, compiling all evidence favorable to her case. Having been with Julian for many years, she held far too many secrets unknown to others. Every verbal insult from Julian, every act of control, every instance of his shameless favoritism toward Mia Reed became part of the courtroom evidence that day. After finishing my rounds, I saw Chloe sitting by the hospital room window, absorbed in reading a book. Sunlight spilled over her, casting a golden halo around her entire figure. She was reading a thick copy of Criminal Law. I walked over and knocked on the door. She looked up, saw me, and gave a genuine smile. "Dr. Hart." "You can call me Professor Hart, or Senior Sister." I glanced at the book in her hands. "How's the reading going?" "I just read the sentencing section for intentional assault. The book says that in cases of particularly vile circumstances, the sentence can be over 10 years in prison." "Theoretically, yes," I nodded. She closed the book and looked at me earnestly. "Professor Hart, I used to think that loving someone meant giving everything for them and tolerating everything about them. Now I realize that's not love. That's self-degradation." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Congratulations. The first phase of treatment is complete with remarkable results. She suddenly smiled with slight embarrassment. Professor Hart, I have one more question. Go ahead. May I may I apply to be your graduate student? I froze for a moment. She added nervously, I know I'm completely inexperienced now, still far from meeting your expectations, but I want to become someone like you, using expertise and knowledge to protect myself and others. I'll work hard. I will definitely pass the exam. Seeing the starlight shimmering in her eyes, it suddenly struck me that this girl's mind might truly have healed. I didn't answer her immediately, just picked up a medical report from her bedside table. Let's cure your anemia, Hurst. Preparing for grad school is physically demanding too. A smile brighter than the sunlight outside bloomed across her face. The news of Chloe's decision to sue Julian Vance quickly reached the Vance family's ears. The first one who couldn't sit still was Julian's mother, Madame Vance. This noble woman who had lived a life of luxury all her years stormed into my office one sunny afternoon flanked by two black-suited bodyguards. The moment she entered, she slammed her Hermes bag onto my desk with a loud smack and looked down at me imperiously. So you're Elias Hart. I kept writing medical records with my head bowed, not even glancing up. Please register first if you're seeing a doctor, then wait in line outside. You! Madame Vance clearly wasn't used to being treated so coldly. Her chest heaved with anger. I'm not here to see a doctor. I'm here to settle this matter. She pulled a check from her bag and slid it across to me. $5 million. Make that girl Chloe shut her mouth and drop all charges, and you stay out of other people's business from now on. I finally raised my head, glanced at the check, and then looked at her. Mrs. Vance, are you trying to bribe me? You can interpret it that way. Madame Vance wore an arrogant expression. A wise man submits to circumstances. Dr. Hart, you're still young with boundless prospects. There's no need to offend our family for someone unrelated. I smiled. Mrs. Vance, you may have misunderstood. First, I'm not a wise man. I'm a doctor. Second, Chloe Evans is now my patient, and protecting her legal rights is my responsibility. Third, I picked up that check and tore it deliberately in half right in front of her, then tore it again into quarters. $5 million to buy a human life plus someone's future? Mrs. Vance, do you have some misunderstanding about your family's financial resources? You're really looking down on your son's precious kidney. Madame Vance's face instantly flushed crimson like pig liver. You don't know what's good for you. Believe me when I say I can make sure you never work in this hospital again with just one word. I believe you, I nodded earnestly. After all, you're the major shareholders of this hospital. However, I must remind you that according to the practicing physician's law, no organization or individual may interfere with a physician's legitimate medical activities. What you're doing now is already illegal. I picked up the phone on the desk. Would you like me to connect you with 911 to consult about relevant legal matters? They've become quite familiar with me recently. You... Madame Vance pointed at me trembling with rage, unable to utter a complete sentence for quite some time. The bodyguard behind her took a step forward, as if ready to take action. I pressed a button on the desk. In less than 10 seconds, 2 uniformed hospital security guards rushed in. Dr. Hart, what's the matter? I pointed at the 2 black-suited bodyguards. These gentlemen seem emotionally unstable. Please escort them outside to cool off. The security personnel immediately stepped forward, flanking the 2 bodyguards who hadn't even had time to react. Madame Vance was completely dumbfounded. She never expected something like this could happen on her own turf. What are you doing? Let them go. Do you have any idea who I am? I stood up, walked over to her, and looked down at her from above. Mrs. Vance, this is a hospital, not your backyard garden. Here, what I say goes. I tossed the torn check into her expensive bag. You'd better keep that money to hire a lawyer for your son, though I suspect even the best lawyer won't be able to win this case. With that, I ignored her and walked straight out of the office. Mrs. Vance refused to give up and went to the hospital room to find Chloe. At that time, Chloe was on the phone with lawyer James Way discussing the details of the lawsuit. Mrs. Vance kicked the door open and threw a bank card onto Chloe's hospital bed. There's $10 million in here. Take the money and get out of my son's life. Never show your face again. Chloe calmly hung up the phone, glanced at the card, then raised her head to look at the domineering woman standing before her. This woman had once been someone she desperately tried to please. To earn her approval, Chloe learned cooking, flower arranging, and everything she thought made a virtuous wife and loving mother. All she got in return was endless nitpicking and contempt. "Auntie," Chloe spoke up, her voice soft yet clear, "do you believe everything in this world can be measured by money?" Madam Vance sneered. "Isn't it? 10 million would take a penniless girl like you a lifetime to earn." "It's not enough," Chloe shook her head. Madam Vance thought she was asking for more, her face revealing a trace of contempt. Chloe smiled, but there was an edge to her smile that Madam Vance had never seen before. "Because my dignity, my health, and my life are priceless." She picked up the bank card, stood up, and walked over to Madam Vance. "Mrs. Vance, do you know, in my eyes, you're just as pathetic as your son." She shoved the card back into Madam Vance's hand. "You think money can buy everything. He thinks power can settle anything. You've both forgotten there's still one thing in this world called the law." Madam Vance was stunned by her words, momentarily at a loss for how to respond. Chloe looked at her and enunciated each word clearly. 10 million to buy off my trampled dignity and nearly lost life. Auntie, are you being naive, or do you think my life is only worth this paltry sum?" Julian's PR team finally made their move. 3 days after being released on bail, he held a grand press conference. The venue was arranged with elegant solemnity. Dressed in a dark suit, Julian appeared haggard, with heavy shadows under his eyes, the perfect image of a lovesick man driven to desperate measures. "Friends from the media, I must offer my sincerest apologies to everyone, and especially to Chloe, for my impulsive actions these past days." His voice was filled with regret. "I admit that day outside the operating room I said some irrational things, but it was because Mia, she was truly at death's door. Any man watching the woman he loves struggling between life and death would lose his composure." He began recounting their earth-shattering love story and how Mia had endured years of suffering from illness. As for Chloe, his tone shifted abruptly, his face showing remorse. "I've always treated her like a younger sister. It's my fault for not handling our relationship properly, letting her misunderstand. I'm willing to take full responsibility and compensate her." Finally, he turned his spearhead directly toward me. "But what I cannot accept is someone exploiting this incident to maliciously slander and even extort. As far as I know, that Dr. Elias Hart demanded an exorbitant compensation for emotional distress from Chloe, and afterward encouraged her to file a lawsuit. I can't help but suspect whether there's a carefully orchestrated conspiracy behind this." These words were delivered with such dramatic flair and skillful evasion of key issues that they instantly swayed part of public opinion. The comments scrolled, "So that's how it is. I knew President Vance wasn't that kind of person. That doctor is terrifying, actually extorting patients. My heart aches for President Vance and also for Mia. Is Chloe going a bit too far?" I was watching this spectacular performance live with Chloe and lawyer James Way in my office. Chloe was trembling with rage. How could he be so shameless, turning black into white? I patted her shoulder, signaling her to calm down. Lawyer James Way adjusted his glasses and flashed an "everything is under control" smile. President Vance's performance was quite devoted, but unfortunately the script was terrible. He tapped a few times on his laptop. At the press conference, just as Julian was about to take questions from reporters, the massive LED screen behind him suddenly switched images. Displayed was a floor plan of an operating room. Immediately afterward, a crystal-clear male voice echoed throughout the venue through all the sound equipment. "I don't care. Take her kidney and save Mia now, immediately." That voice, that tone, that full-throated roar bursting with vigor, came from none other than Julian Vance himself, the very man who had just been standing on stage, overcome with remorse. The entire venue erupted in uproar. Reporters surged forward like madmen, camera flashes exploding in a blinding frenzy. Julian's face instantly turned deathly pale. He stared in horror at the large screen, then whipped his head toward the backstage area, screaming hoarsely, "Turn it off! Turn it off now!" But it was already too late. That recording played on loop 3 times, each word landing like a resounding slap across his face. His PR team descended into chaos as the venue's security completely lost control of the situation. Attorney James Way smiled faintly and pressed the enter key. The real show is just beginning. The image on the large screen switched again. This time, it wasn't an audio recording, but surveillance footage. In the corner of the video, the date and time were clearly displayed, the afternoon of the day before the surgery. The location was the hospital's back garden. In the footage, Mia Reed, whom Julian had described as struggling between life and death and tormented by illness, was sitting on a bench wearing casual clothes. She looked radiant and full of energy, holding a family-sized bucket of fried chicken. She happily munched on fried chicken legs while scrolling through her phone, her mouth glistening with grease. The way she devoured the food? Forget kidney failure, you'd believe she could wrestle a bull barehanded. The entire press conference venue fell into deathly silence. Every camera lens focused on Mia eating heartily on screen and Julian's ashen face on stage. A few seconds later, a reporter's question pierced the silence, sharp and sarcastic. "May I ask, President Vance, is this what you meant by on the verge of collapse? Is Miss Reed suffering from kidney failure or starvation ghost failure?" Someone couldn't hold back their laughter first, and immediately afterward, the entire venue erupted in thunderous roars of laughter. That laughter was the ultimate mockery of this clumsy performance. Julian stood on the stage swaying unsteadily, knowing he was finished. Everything he had meticulously built was shattered in this moment by a fried chicken drumstick. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The case of Julian Vance and Mia Reed became the hottest topic of the year due to its melodramatic twists and immense public attention. Mia stood trial first, confronted with irrefutable evidence, my diagnostic report, Senior Kane's psychiatric evaluation, the infamous tango video, and the fried chicken surveillance footage. She had no means to defend herself. In the end, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and attempted solicitation with multiple charges combined. When the bailiffs led her away, her face was haggard, her eyes vacant. Not a trace of her former glory as a movie queen. Next came Julian Vance. His legal team was impressively formidable, clearly worth every penny he'd spent. They tried to find weaknesses in my professional ethics and motives, insinuating that I harbored personal prejudices against Julian and was seeking deliberate revenge. Dr. Hart, the lead counsel for the opposing side, a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair, asked aggressively, "Can you honestly say you harbored no prejudice against my client? The moment you received his instructions, instead of attempting communication or verification, you immediately called the police. Does this align with the behavioral logic of a normal doctor?" I looked at him calmly. "Mr. Lawyer, my behavioral logic is quite simple. It's Article 232 of the Criminal Law of the Republic of China, intentional homicide, and Article 234, intentional injury. When someone explicitly instructs me to harm an innocent life, my first reaction is to prevent a crime. This isn't just the behavioral logic of a doctor, it's the behavioral logic of any citizen." Then why didn't you first communicate with Chairman Vance? Perhaps he was just speaking in haste. Haste? I smiled. Mr. Lawyer, adults must take responsibility for their words and actions. The phrase, take her kidney, isn't equivalent to, please do me a favor. It's a clear, unambiguous criminal instruction. My professional ethics tell me that when faced with such instructions, I have no obligation to communicate, only a duty to report to the police. The opposing lawyer choked momentarily before attempting another angle of attack. Then how do you explain demanding exorbitant hospital fees from Miss Evans? Isn't this extortion? As soon as this question was posed, murmurs rippled through the public gallery. I glanced at Chloe sitting at the plaintiff's table, who gave me a reassuring look. I turned back to face the lawyer and answered word by word. First, every fee I charged complies with hospital regulations and market prices. Expert consultations and specialized nursing care are inherently expensive. Moreover, I provided the patient with additional legal aid consultations and psychological crisis interventions. These are priceless services. I believe my charges are entirely reasonable. Second, I paused briefly before raising my voice. The reason I insisted on charging Chloe was to teach her a lesson. No one's help should be taken for granted. Even brothers keep clear accounts. She must learn to take responsibility for her own life, instead of expecting another domineering CEO or savior to rescue her. I wanted her to understand that dignity and independence must be earned through her own efforts, not through others' charity. I turned to the presiding judge. Most importantly, while I issued the bill to Chloe, she hasn't paid a single cent, because I told her this money should be paid by the person who attempted to harm her. Therefore, this bill now serves as part of the civil compensation claim against the defendant, Mr. Julian Vance. My words fell, and the courtroom was dead silent. The opposing lawyer's face was more colorful than a painter's palette. He was completely speechless. The final verdict came without any suspense. Julian Vance was sentenced to 5 years in prison for the crime of inciting intentional injury, which was deemed particularly severe and caused significant negative social impact. Additionally, he was ordered to pay plaintiff Chloe Evans a substantial 8-figure sum in compensation for emotional distress. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding bang. That sound seemed to toll the final death knell of this absurd farce. Julian collapsed in the defendant's docket, his gaze vacant, as he muttered incoherently, "Impossible, this can't be." Until the very last moment, he seemed unable to believe that he would end up in prison because of a kidney that hadn't even been harvested yet. I walked down from the witness stand and passed him without pausing. Chloe also stood up. She didn't even glance at Julian, walking straight towards me instead. We met at the center of the courtroom. She looked at me, her eyes devoid of triumphant vengeance, only holding the calm and relief of skies clearing after rain. She bowed deeply to me. "Professor Hart, thank you." I studied her and smiled. "You don't have to thank me. You earned this yourself." She lifted her head, her gaze bright and resolute. "I know." Outside the courtroom doors, sunlight streamed brilliantly. A new world was waiting for her.
Half a year later, the autumn sky was clear and the air crisp with fragrant osmanthus blossoms in the air. It was once again the annual graduate school admission season. My office door was knocked. "Come in." The door opened, and in walked a girl wearing a white shirt, jeans, with her hair tied up in a high ponytail. She was carrying a thick stack of documents, her face showing just the right amount of nervousness mixed with full confidence. It was Chloe Evans. Compared to the girl who had been curled up crying in her hospital bed half a year ago, she was practically unrecognizable. She had cut her hair shorter, making her look more capable. Gone were the designer clothes she'd bought to please others. Her simple outfit now made her radiate vibrant energy. "Good afternoon, Professor Hart."
she said, placing the documents on my desk while standing perfectly straight. Sit. I pointed to the chair opposite me and picked up the top document from the stack. It was her graduate school application form and personal resume. The academic achievement section was particularly impressive. She'd actually done it. In just 6 months, she had self-studied all the undergraduate medical courses and passed the preliminary exams with the highest score in her major. You've lost some weight, but you look spirited. I set down the resume and remarked. She smiled. I've been living in the library lately. Got tired of cafeteria food. Your foundational knowledge is solid, and your preliminary exam scores were excellent. I flipped through her documents, speaking matter-of-factly. But as you know, I don't select students based solely on grades. I understand. She nodded earnestly, her gaze steady. What you value most are clinical thinking and research potential. Oh, so how do you think you fare in these two aspects? I asked with keen interest. Instead of answering directly, she pulled out a document from her stack of materials and handed it to me. Professor Hart, this is a short paper I wrote, a preliminary exploration on the impact of stress-induced psychological trauma on adrenal cortical function. I raised my eyebrow and took it from her. The paper adopted a refreshingly novel approach, using her personal experience as a starting point and drawing on extensive literature. She analyzed the physiological stress responses of individuals enduring prolonged high pressure and emotional abuse from multiple perspectives, including psychology, endocrinology, and immunology. Though still somewhat unpolished, the work demonstrated clear reasoning and rigorous logic, evidently the result of tremendous effort. Quite intriguing. I set the paper down. Why did you choose this topic? Because I wanted to understand. Chloe met my gaze frankly. After researching extensively, I discovered that prolonged emotional PUA can genuinely alter brain structure and hormone levels, making people dependent, insecure, and impairing their judgment. From a pathological perspective, love addiction is actually a diagnosable and treatable condition. She paused before continuing. I want to delve deeper into this field. If we can find effective intervention methods, perhaps we could help more people like me break free from unhealthy relationships. I looked at her, remaining silent for a long time. She nervously clenched her hands. Professor Hart, is my idea too far-fetched? I shook my head, picked up the pen on the table, and signed my name in the advisor's comments of her application form. No. I pushed the signed form toward her. Your idea has real merit. Chloe stared at the bold, flowing characters Elias Hart on the form, followed by the words, Admission approved, and her eyes instantly reddened, but she held back, refusing to let the tears fall. She stood up and bowed deeply to me once more. Thank you, Professor Hart. I'll work hard from now on. I waved my hand dismissively. Don't celebrate too soon. My graduate students have notoriously low graduation rates. Yet she smiled, her eyes shining with unprecedented determination. Don't worry, I won't let you down. Clutching the remaining documents, she turned to leave. As she reached the doorway, she turned back as if remembering something and asked playfully, By the way, Professor Hart, does your graduate program provide meals? I was momentarily stunned, then burst out laughing. No, but we do provide stipends. She laughed even more joyfully, waved at me, and turned to step into the sunlight outside. I watched her retreating figure, feeling inexplicably happy. From a love-struck fool who nearly had her kidney harvested to a determined future medical graduate student, this was probably the most successful brain surgery I'd ever performed. A few weeks into the semester, I found Chloe in the hospital library buried under a mountain of textbooks on psycho-neuroimmunology. A half-eaten protein bar sat forgotten next to her laptop. You know, I said, setting a steaming cup of green tea down beside her, metabolizing knowledge requires calories. Even the brain needs glucose. She blinked up at me, pushing her glasses up her nose. They were new, stylish rectangular frames that suited her sharp new focus. Professor Hart, I was just cross-referencing the cortisol response curves in Study A with the norepinephrine spikes in Study B. The correlation in subjects with documented emotional abuse histories is staggering. I pulled up a chair. Show me. For the next 20 minutes, she walked me through her notes, her voice animated, her fingers tracing graphs on her screen. The timid girl who could barely speak up was gone, replaced by a nascent researcher with a fire in her eyes. It was a better transformation than any scripted drama. "This is good work, Chloe," I said finally, "but you're missing a control group." "What do you mean?"
You're comparing abused to non-abused. But what about the post-abused? The survivors, like you, who've undergone a paradigm shift. What does their hormone profile look like 6 months out? A year? Is the damage reversible, or is it simply rerouted? I tapped her notebook. That's your unique angle. You're not just a researcher on this topic. You're a potential data point in your own longitudinal study. She stared at me, her mind visibly whirring. A longitudinal self-study? Is that ethical? With full disclosure, informed consent from yourself, and institutional review board approval, absolutely. It's called autoethnography in the social sciences. In medicine, we just call it a very thorough patient history. I gave her a small smile. Think about it. She did more than think. By the next supervisory meeting, she had a draft proposal. She'd also started a support group for former patients of the hospital who had histories of medically unexplained symptoms linked to stress or coercive relationships. She wasn't just studying the problem, she was building the clinic. Her transformation was the talk of the residency program, but not everyone was a fan. Dr. Liam Thorne, the chief of surgery, and a man whose ego was as polished as his surgical instruments, cornered me one afternoon in the doctor's lounge. He was old guard, a friend of the Vance family, and had never approved of my theatrics. "Hart," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "that Evans girl, your new pet project, I've been reviewing her file." "Her academic file is exemplary," I said, not looking up from my tablet. "I'm not talking about her grades. I'm talking about her history, the instability, the lawsuit, the media circus." He lowered his voice. "This hospital has a reputation. We train surgeons, not activists. Her focus is all over the place: psychology, endocrinology, law. A surgeon needs single-minded discipline." I finally looked at him. Single-minded discipline is what nearly got her killed by a man who saw her as a spare parts depot. What she's developing isn't a lack of focus, Dr. Thorne. It's context. And in my opinion, a surgeon who understands the psychological and social context of their patient's illness is infinitely more valuable than one who just sees a pathological organ. He scoffed. "Sentimental nonsense. You're letting personal involvement cloud your judgment. First, you blow up the Vance situation. Now you're molding this girl into some kind of hybrid crusader. It's unprofessional." I stood up, meeting his gaze evenly. What's unprofessional, Dr. Thorne, is ignoring a patient's autonomy. What's unprofessional is allowing hospital investors to believe they own the people on our operating tables. Chloe Evans is excelling because she's using her experience to ask questions no one else in this program is asking. If that makes her an activist, then perhaps this program needs more activists. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a clinic to run. The tension in the surgical department simmered, but Chloe, to her credit, seemed oblivious to it. She was too busy. Between her courses, her support group, and her proposal, she was also shadowing me in the OR. Her hands, I noted with professional satisfaction, were steady. Her questions were precise. She didn't flinch at the reality of blood and bone. One day, after a complex nephrectomy, she was helping me close. The silence was companionable, filled only with the beep of monitors and the snipping of sutures.
You know, she said quietly, her eyes on her meticulous stitching, for months after it happened, I had nightmares about this room, about lying on that table, awake but paralyzed, listening to someone decide to take a part of me. I didn't interrupt. But now, she continued, tying off a suture with a confident flick of her wrist, when I'm in here, all I see is the precision, the intent to repair, not to take. It feels like reclamation. She looked up at me then, and there was no fear in her eyes, only a profound understanding. You didn't just save my kidney, Professor Hart. You saved my faith in this entire profession. It was perhaps the greatest compliment I had ever received. The final test came unexpectedly. It was a busy Friday evening. Chloe was on her first overnight shadowing shift in the ER. I was reviewing charts when my pager buzzed with an urgent message from the triage desk. Incoming. MVC. Multiple casualties. ETA. 2 men. We mobilized. The calm chaos of trauma reception descended. The first 2 patients were straightforward. The third ambulance doors opened, and the gurney was rolled out. Leo Carter, now a more confident resident, was calling out vitals. Then he stopped, his face paling. On the gurney, his face bruised and bloody, one arm clearly fractured, was Julian Vance. He was semi-conscious, groaning. His expensive suit was torn. The smell of alcohol mixed with the copper tang of blood. A police officer was walking alongside the gurney, talking to the charge nurse. Single car accident, wrapped it around a tree, high rate of speed, failed the field sobriety test spectacularly. I glanced across the bay. Chloe had frozen, a stack of sterile gauze in her hands. She was staring at the man on the gurney. All the color had drained from her face.
This was it, the universe's twisted sense of dramatic irony, the victim and the would-be perpetrator, meeting again in the sterile, fluorescent glare of my ER. Julian's eyes fluttered open, bleary with pain and intoxication. They scanned the ceiling lights, then landed, on me first, a flash of confused hatred. Then they drifted and found Chloe. For a second, there was no recognition. Then it dawned, slow and ugly, his swollen lips twisted. You, he slurred, trying to raise his uninjured arm. You and her. This is your fault. All of it. Leo looked from Julian to Chloe, then to me, his eyes wide with a silent question. What do we do? The old Chloe would have crumbled. She would have dropped the gauze and fled. The new Chloe took a deep, audible breath. She looked at me, not at Julian. I gave her the slightest nod. She turned to Leo, her voice remarkably level. Resident Carter, what are the patient's vitals? We need a full trauma panel, CBC, talk screen, and get imaging on that arm and a C-spine. He's altered. Assume spinal precautions until cleared. She was quoting protocol, verbatim, using it as a lifeline to steady herself. Leo snapped back to attention. Right, BP 150/90, heart rate 120, respirations shallow. Julian was still muttering. Ruined me. She ruined everything. Chloe walked to the foot of the gurney, her movements deliberate. She picked up the clipboard and made a note. Then she looked down at him, her gaze clinical, detached. The gaze of a professional assessing a problem, not a victim facing her monster. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice cool and clear, you've been in an accident. You're in the emergency department at Mercy General. We're going to take care of you. Please try to lie still. The sheer, breathtaking normality of it, her clinical courtesy, seemed to short-circuit his drunken rage. He stared at her, bewildered, as if she were speaking a foreign language. The script he knew, the one where she was the weeping victim or the vengeful accuser, had no lines for this. She handed the clipboard to the trauma nurse and turned to assist with another patient, her back straight. I took over Julian's primary survey. As I palpated his abdomen, he winced. You, he hissed at me. You happy now? Look at me. I shone a penlight into his pupils, checking for concussion. I'm not in the business of deriving happiness from the misfortune of others, Mr. Vance, even yours. Now, follow the light, please. He was treated, stabilized, and admitted for observation. The police waited to formally charge him once he was sober. The drama was, medically speaking, anticlimactic. Later, after the rush had died down, I found Chloe on the rooftop garden, staring out at the city lights. She was hugging herself against the cool night air. "You okay?" I asked, handing her the cup of tea I'd brought. She took it, her fingers wrapping around the warmth. "I think so. It was strange. I thought I'd feel something huge, anger, fear, satisfaction, but mostly I just felt professional and a little sad. He's just a broken, angry man in a hospital gown now. All that power, all that menace, it's gone. It was pathetic." "That," I said, leaning on the railing beside her, "is the sound of true healing. Not forgetting, not even forgiving necessarily, but rendering the monster powerless by seeing it for what it really is, a sad, human problem." She sipped her tea. "He'll get better lawyers. He'll probably get a reduced sentence, maybe even avoid prison with rehab and community service." "Probably," I agreed. "The law moves in mysterious ways. But you're not waiting for the law to finish him, are you? You're already miles past him." She smiled, a real one, reflected in the twinkling lights below. "Yeah, I am." The semester rolled on. Chloe's support group gained official hospital backing. Her research proposal was approved. She presented a poster at a regional medical conference, and while it didn't win prizes, the questions she fielded were serious and engaged. On the last day of the term, she came to my office. She placed a single bound document on my desk. It was the first chapter of her thesis, From Victim to Vector, Charting the Neuroendocrine Recovery Trajectory in Survivors of Coercive Control, a prospective autoethnographic pilot study. "I wanted you to see the first draft," she said. I opened it. The dedication page was simple. "For E.H., who taught me that the most important organ to save is never listed on the surgical chart." I closed the document, a rare lump in my throat. "This is excellent work, Chloe." "There's more," she said, a glint of her old nervousness returning, mixed with new excitement. "I've been accepted to present a talk on the preliminary findings at the International Conference on Psychology and Medicine in Stockholm next spring." I couldn't help but grin. "Stockholm? That's a far cry from a hospital bed in Mercy General." "It is," she laughed. "And the conference organizers are paying. I don't need to ask anyone for the money. Not Julian, not a lawyer, not even you." The pride in that statement was a tangible thing. "Outstanding." I stood and offered my hand. "Congratulations, researcher Evans." She shook it firmly, her grip sure. "Thank you, Professor Hart, for everything. For the bill, for the lawyer, for the hard questions, for seeing a student where everyone else saw a victim." I walked her to the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, now bustling with other students, she turned back one last time. "You know," she said, "the barrage comments in my head finally stopped. I think I overwrote the old script." "Good," I said. "Now go write a better one for someone else." She nodded, that determined light in her eyes, and disappeared into the flow of the corridor. Back at my desk, I looked at the cityscape through my window. No dramatic barrages, no wailing white lotuses, no domineering CEOs kicking down doors. Just the quiet, complex, endlessly fascinating work of healing. One broken body, one fractured mind, one reclaimed life at a time. I adjusted my gold-rimmed glasses and picked up the next patient chart. It was going to be a good day. The Stockholm conference was a revelation. Chloe, dressed in a simple but sharp navy blazer, stood at the podium in a room full of established researchers and clinicians. Her voice, once faint with anemia and fear, now carried clear and steady through the microphone, explaining graphs of cortisol levels and narratives of recovery. She didn't mention names, but her central case study was transparently, powerfully her own. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was respectful, engaged. After her talk, a senior professor from Cambridge sought her out to discuss methodological possibilities. She had arrived, not as a scandal, but as a scholar. Back at Mercy General, her success became a quiet legend.
The simmering tension with Dr. Thorne didn't vanish, but it morphed into a grudging, silent acknowledgement. He couldn't argue with international conference invitations. The Chloe Evans Support Protocol, a simple, humane checklist for nurses to screen for signs of coercive control in patients presenting with chronic, unexplained symptoms, was quietly adopted by the Psychiatry Liaison Department. Change, it turned out, didn't always need a dramatic showdown. Sometimes it just needed a good, solid pilot study and a former patient stubborn enough to implement it. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice, though slow, ground on. Julian Vance, his family's resources depleted by the scandal and the civil judgment, ultimately pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment. He served 8 months in a low-security facility, followed by 2 years of probation and mandated community service. The news was a small, bitter footnote in the business section. The domineering CEO was now a felon doing roadside trash pickup in an orange vest. The poetic justice was almost too tidy. Mia Reed served her full sentence. She was released to a media landscape that had long since moved on. A tell-all interview she attempted to sell was declined by every major network. The story was considered last season's melodrama. The last I heard through the hospital gossip chain, she had moved to a small town and was allegedly trying to start a lifestyle blog. The White Lotus had wilted in the harsh light of reality. One afternoon, about 2 years after the ordeal began, I was in my office finalizing a grant application when a familiar name appeared on my desk calendar: Chloe Evans, Final Thesis Defense. The room for the defense was full. Faculty, students, even a few members of her support group sat in the back. Chloe stood before the review committee, a panel of formidable minds, including Dr. Thorne and Director Louis from psychiatry. She was flawless. She fielded pointed statistical questions from Thorne with crisp, data-driven answers. She expanded on neurobiological mechanisms under Kane's probing with eloquent clarity. When Thorne, in his final question, veered slightly with "And do you believe this soft science has a place in the rigorous world of surgical practice?" she didn't flinch. "Dr. Thorne, the hardest science I encountered wasn't in a textbook. It was the biochemistry of fear that kept me compliant, and the endocrinology of recovery that allowed me to stand here. Understanding that science doesn't weaken a surgeon's hand, it steadies it by telling them why a body might be failing, not just how. I believe it's the difference between being a technician and being a healer." The room was silent. Thorne merely nodded, making a note. It was the closest he would ever come to a concession. She passed, unanimously, summa cum laude. After the formalities, as people milled about with cheap wine and cheese cubes, she found me by the window. "Well, Dr. Evans," I said. The title made her beam. "It sounds impossible." "It sounds earned," I corrected. "What's next? Stanford for the fellowship you mentioned?" She shook her head, swirling the wine in her plastic cup. "I've deferred, just for a year. I've received funding to formalize the support group into a proper clinic here at Mercy, integrated with the endocrinology and psych departments. Director Kane is on board. We're calling it the Resilience Clinic." She looked at me, a hint of the old uncertainty returning. "It feels right to build it here where it all happened, to turn the place into something different." I felt a surge of pride so strong it was almost paternal. It's the perfect next step. "Will you be on the advisory board?" she asked. "I can't do it without your brand of merciless compassion." "I'd be honored," I said, "and my consultation fees have gone up, you know." She laughed, the sound free and easy. "Put it on my tab." Later that evening, leaving the hospital, I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench in the main courtyard. It was Julian Vance. He was thinner, his expensive clothes replaced by nondescript chinos and a windbreaker. He was just staring at the main entrance, his expression unreadable. He saw me and stiffened. I considered walking past, but some final thread of professional duty, or perhaps just curiosity, pulled me to a stop a few feet away. "Mr. Vance?" I said, neutrally. "Dr. Hart?" His voice was rough, quieter. The roar was gone. He looked back at the hospital doors. "She's in there, isn't she? They said she was having some ceremony. Her thesis defense. She passed." He nodded slowly, as if confirming a fact he already knew. A long minute passed. The spring air was cool. "I read about the clinic she's starting," he said, almost to himself. "My probation officer thought it was a good community resource, suggested I might learn something." He gave a short, hollow laugh that held no humor. The irony. "Life is full of it," I said. He finally looked at me. The arrogance was gone, burned away by shame and consequence. What remained was a confused, weary man. I never meant for it to go that far. I was used to getting what I wanted. "That," I said, "is the most tragic part. You never stopped to think that what you wanted wasn't yours to take." He had no retort. He just looked back at the ground. Our conversation was over. There was nothing more to say, no grand reckoning. Just a man on a bench facing the long, dull aftermath of his own choices. I walked to my car. The night was clear. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Professor Hart, it's Leo Carter. I'm applying for the Cardiothoracic Fellowship at Mass General. Would you be willing to write me a letter of recommendation? I learned more about ethics from you in one day than in 4 years of textbooks." I smiled, typing a reply. "Of course, but my letters are notoriously honest. Be prepared." As I drove home, I reflected. The transmigration, the barrage, the tropes, they had all faded into the background noise of a very real life. The tragic novel's plot had been thoroughly and irreversibly derailed. There was no grand regret from the male lead, just probation. No wasted pining from the female lead, just a doctorate and a clinic. The white moonlight had dimmed to obscurity, and I, the plot device meant to enable a crime, had become a professor, an advisor, a writer of recommendation letters. The story wasn't a tragedy, nor was it a simple romance. It was something better, messier, and more real, a medical history. It featured disease, entitlement, manipulation, love sickness, a crisis, the operating room, an intervention, a phone call to 911, a difficult treatment plan, lawsuits, psychiatry, self-examination, and a long, ongoing recovery. The prognosis was excellent. Pulling into my driveway, I realized the internal barrage of commentary that had once narrated my life like a chaotic live stream had finally, silently stopped broadcasting. The channel was now dedicated to the quiet, compelling drama of ordinary healing. I was no longer a character in someone else's novel. I was just Dr. Elias Hart, heading inside to draft a letter for a promising young surgeon and to look over the preliminary budget for a groundbreaking new clinic.